everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how's it going today?
It's going very well. You know, last weekend, we had a wonderful event here in Fargo called Yard and Garden Palooza. And so I had an absolutely wonderful time. Now, that is an event that is held every 2 years, sponsored by NDSU Cass County Extension. And we have our master gardeners that help coordinate it and line it up. And so there were about 270 people there in all.
It's popular and it sells out pretty quick.
It is, sells out quickly. And we do this every 2 years. So the 2 years go by quickly. So stay tuned. It'll be in 2 years. But it was absolutely amazing. We had a keynote speaker that we brought in from Vermont. His name was Charlie Nardozzi. He is a nationally known garden speaker. He's written about 8 books or so, and he gave an absolutely wonderful keynote program on foodscaping.
Okay.
So he gave a lot of the details, practical details of how you can grow food in your landscape.
Okay.
You know, how to make things look really pretty, but also have something to eat in it. For example, where you might want kind of a ground cover in between shrubs or other things, strawberries make a very good ground cover. And shrubs, of course, I have one of these myself, but he mentioned aronia berries.
They can get quite big.
Can get quite big. And so anyway, it was all about how to incorporate food into our yard. Another point he brought up was if you want some screening in your backyard, maybe you want to give yourself a little privacy. Well, apple trees do give screening because you want to keep them relatively low-headed so you can pick them easier. And so they provide a kind of a screen. So if you plant them near the kind of the outer perimeter, I guess you risk having some of your neighbors take off a few apples from kind of close to their side of the tree. But anyway, it was a really great keynote. And then there were a lot of breakout sessions, things on growing succulents and new trees and shrubs, and lots of good breakouts during the day. The end of the day was Charlie Nardozzi and I again. We were up on stage doing a program called Stump the Horticulturist. Throughout the day, the attendees could write down gardening questions, put them in a basket, and then at the end of the day, we answered them. Everything from what's your thoughts on no-till gardening to how do you control fungus gnats on houseplants, and how do you control creeping Charlie in a lawn? Well, anyway, as we discussed, and then also things about what are some of the good hardy things that we plan should be growing. What it really occurred to me, and what I learned from our discussion and after our discussion, what I learned was that, Vermont is somewhat similar to North Dakota, Minnesota in growing conditions. It's a northern type state, but it's quite a few miles apart. I don't know, 1,500 miles or so apart. And as we talked, it became very evident that there is a bank of knowledge of gardening that kind of surpasses where you're at. As long as you're in the northern United States, we talked, our information meshed, we had a great time. Nothing that we answered questions to, he'd take one shot at it, I'd take another shot at the question, and our answers meshed. It was like there's camaraderie in gardening. And so it was absolutely awesome. I just found it like we were able to discuss gardening with Charlie from Vermont as though he was next door in Minnesota.
Well, gardening's a common language, right? It's a meeting point that you can share your experiences. Maybe while the soil may be slightly different, some of the experiences may be the same. I was wondering when you said that two of you was stump the horticulturist, and you were asked questions, especially about no-till gardening. You have specific thoughts about that. Were you on the same page with that? Because it sounds like some people come from different places on that.
We do. Now, and as I gave my comments on no-till gardening, I said, I grew up rototilling the garden. That's just the way it was always done. And in fact, I inherited my dad's rototiller. So currently it's probably 50 some years old. And it's a big Troy-built horse, and that's actually the name of it is a horse, and I love it. It has this kind of the aroma of gasoline and old oil, and I love the way it churns up the soil, the aroma of freshly turned soil, and so I'm not going to give that up. But there's a lot to be said about not tilling soil, because when you till soil, it brings up weed seeds from below, so then they start to grow, and you can, if you're not careful, especially with clay soil, you can ruin the structure. If you rototill it when it's too wet, you got a bunch of hard clumps that never disintegrate, and you're also disrupting. In nature, soil doesn't really get disrupted. Things grow in nature without that tilling of it. And so Charlie was a big proponent of no-till gardening. And really, in a lot of raised bed gardening, you don't have to do a lot of tilling. You don't have to get a tiller up into it. You can kind of work the soil up loosely or create a soil such that you can dig easily into it without tilling it all up. So what I mentioned is, I'm not going to give up my tilling because I really enjoy it. But I am going to take a portion of the garden and I'm going to convert that to no-till.
Yeah.
With more mulch, keeping the soil in kind of a more naturalistic state, or now returning it to a more naturalistic state. And so I'm going to have my cake and eat it too.
Yep, that's a good point.
So I'm going to enjoy the rototilling and the garden the way I grew up gardening, but I am going to work into the no-till gardening because I can absolutely see the benefits of that. And I see the disadvantage of rototilling, especially for my weeds.
Yeah.
I'm bringing up a whole new crop of weeds for myself each year. And so that was an interesting point. Everything else, there was no really controversy. And I mean, we didn't get in a shouting match about no-till gardening, but it was interesting to get his points. He was all for no-till gardening.
What, you talk about often that the day lost is a day that you don't learn something new. What did you learn from that day? What were some of your takeaways?
One of the takeaways that I really enjoyed was the NDSU new tree and shrub varieties.
Okay.
There are some great new varieties, and sometimes we'll get Todd West in here again to talk about.
He was great. We had him on a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and they're continually bringing new items into the forefront, trees and shrubs that will grow and that have really neat outlooks and characteristics. So that was one of the highlights of my day, was learning about some of the new things that are on the horizon.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, were they things that were on the horizon, or are they things that are now available for the public and out on the market?
Out on the market already.
Great.
NDSU has been very careful about that because in the past, they've sometimes indicated things too early that they were working on, and then it gets us all hepped up for them, and then you go to the garden center and, well, no, they're 5 or 10 years from being marketed. So now they don't really tell us about these until they're actually on the market, so that when we hear about them, we can go buy them.
So you were literally like, these are some of the things that, while you do work with NDSU, these are things that were new to you.
That were new to me as well.
Great.
Exactly. And there was a wonderful, wonderful breakout program on succulents.
Oh, okay.
And so I learned a lot of the variety and the diversity in some of the succulents and things that I didn't know. Some of the things, some of the finesses of watering, I learned. I got a better understanding maybe of how and when to know whether succulents, if they should be watered and when to water. And so there were lots of good programs such as this. A wonderful one, program on onions and garlic. Some of the ways, for example, one point that I guess I had never concentrated on was on onions. Most of us would like as big an onion as you can get, because then there's more of it. But the the larger the onion grows, the more leaves it gets. The reverse. The more leaves you can coax to grow, you'll get more layers of the bulb underneath.
So the more leaves you can see above ground,
the more layers that onion will have, so the bigger onion. So I hadn't really thought about that much. So in other words, fertilizing your onions to encourage more leafy top growth will in turn give you a bigger bulb. It makes sense. Fertilize your onions, you get a bigger bulb. But the reason it does that is because it's producing more leaves. And so you can almost count the number of leaves because each leaf is attached to a layer underneath. So I thought that was kind of a neat thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, everyone stay tuned. 2 years will be here before we know it. Yard and Garden Palooza.
Well, something that's here before we know it now. I mean, we are in spring. We've just had this week, we had a 80, almost 90-degree day. What's coming up in your yard so far?
Yes, when I've started a little bit of cleanup, which we'll talk about, the fernleaf peonies, which is one of the first things to emerge. And as I'm looking at them, right now they're maybe 2 inches out of the soil, but they already, on top of that little shoot, have the big flower bud already. So it's fun to see them come up and unfurl. And another nickname for them is the Memorial Day peony. So they're usually blooming before Memorial Day, before the old-fashioned peonies. So those are already up. Our daylilies are up maybe an inch or two. There's green coming up out of the daylilies. The iris are kind of interesting in that it seems like they never go fully dormant in the winter. It seems you can always see a little something that looks greenish, like a greenish spear coming up out. Well, anyway, they're waking up. I don't see anything yet on our old-fashioned peonies.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any buds swelling on the roses yet. I mean, just even the leafy type buds. I don't see those waking up. Oh, by the way, I had a lot of winter dieback on the roses. Oh. The rose canes, there's a lot of brown, black canes. That part's dead. The greenish cane is way down below, but I'll prune those back to that. But lots of damage on those. It's fun to watch. Our plum tree, the buds are swelling on those, and so I know that pretty soon they're going to pop out in a flower, as soon as the weather kind of stabilizes. I saw the first forsythia blooming around town on 10th Street. Forsythia is fascinating. The yellow flowers come out before the leaves emerge.
And bright yellow.
Bright yellow. And so that's fun. So those are some of the most noticeable things that I am seeing. How about your yard? What are you seeing emerging so far?
Well, the sure sign of spring for us is Siberian squill in the lawn. In the front lawn. It's out there. At first we didn't really like it. I don't think there's much we can do to get rid of it. And if there is, it's really probably not worth. It's not where we're going to spend our time. For people who don't know, it's a wider blade of grass that comes up, but it comes up with a real violet flower. So it's actually really pretty. And we've had kids in the neighborhood come through and ask if they can pick some. And
so are they blooming now already?
They are.
Oh, they are. Awesome.
Yep. So that's great to see. We're having also in the front yard, the tulips are coming up, but we don't have any fencing around that. So the rabbits
I see.
We may not be seeing any flowers there.
Well, if they leave them alone and find something else when the flower buds come up, maybe they'll leave the flower buds alone.
What I should do is I should put some chili flakes around there.
Oh, good idea.
And I think sometimes that has a little bit deterrent, and if it's enough of a deterrent.
And blood meal, which can act as a fertilizer as well, has some deterrent.
So some things are coming up. We are seeing our classic peony is starting to come up out of the ground. I should go check on the ferny peony. I haven't seen that one come up yet. But there's other things are starting to come up. I think Sam said that the asparagus was starting to maybe through just a little bit. So we'll see. So I've
got to get the tops cut off of our asparagus. I still have the old tops on
last
ours.
Year?
Yeah, from last year. I got to get that cut down to ground level and before the spears. It's interesting. So many of these things, we concentrate on air temperature for kickstarting things. And it does. That's important. But the soil temperature, as the soil temperature warms up, many things such as the asparagus, they start kickstarting when the soil gets to a certain temperature. And probably the Siberian squill also is probably the soil temperature is probably
that's in a bright sunny spot. Yeah,
sure.
Well, we're gonna get to some things that we should do in the yard to get our kind of yard in shape. But first, you've got a question from a listener.
Yes, Amy from Bloomington, Minnesota, wrote in and sent a photo of a pine tree. So Amy writes, I planted a variety of Japanese pine last summer. Over the winter, it became increasingly brown and now has very few green needles. Can you help diagnose the problem, or perhaps it's beyond savings? I got it at a local or at a chain store, so unfortunately has no warranty. The spot it's planted in faces south, is fairly protected from north winds, gets about 6 hours of direct sun during the summer. I have 2 to 3 inches of mulch. There's a ground sprinkler up the hill. I would love any advice you can give. I enjoy listening to your podcast.
Oh, it's nice to hear.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy, for sending the email and for sending the photo. So now a couple of thoughts. It sounds, Amy, like you've done everything well. You've mulched around.
Treated the
you've
ground right.
Treated it.
It sounds like it's in a good position.
Yeah, everything you've done is great. So now the photo that Amy sent in has, it's probably I'm guessing a 3-foot tall pine. And of course, pines have the longer needles than a spruce evergreen. And the majority of it is, the needles are all rusty brown, dead brown. There is one little shoot of that, a twig, in which the needles are green. So that indicates to me that there is still some life within that pine, but it looks like the most of it is all burnt up. So now a couple of reasons why that may have happened. I emailed Amy back and asked if she still had the tag that could indicate what the botanical name of that was. Japanese pine could be kind of a generic term for a pine, but I'd like to know the exact genus and species, because then we could see, was this a pine that is adapted to Minnesota, or is it a type that would be more suited for down south, and so it just burnt once it got in our area?
Zone, yeah.
Might not be the right zone. That's one option. Also, indicated a south exposure. Now, it's nice to prevent it from the north winds, but the south exposure can also cause burning. The bright winter sun reflecting off the snow can cause such a brightness that the same way that a skier in winter can get a sunburn, that can burn evergreens. So it's possible that the reflected snow, the sun reflecting off the snow, could have just burnt all the needles off of that. So now where do we go from there with a pine that looks like it's 99% all burnt up? A couple of things. Scratch the twigs to see if there's a green layer under the outer bark. The green layer would indicate that there is still life at this point. And also examine the buds at the end of the twigs. Even though the needles are all fried off, check to see if the buds at the end of the twigs are sticky, and rub a few with your fingers, see if there's some green life there, and it could burst forth from the end. Now, the needles that are burnt they're just gonna fall off. There's no resurrecting those, but it's possible the growth could come. So now a decision would need to be made. If there's still life there, if the buds at the end of the twigs are good, it could recover. But do you want to wait that long? Would it be better just to make sure it's a good species, or maybe replace with something that is more adapted for us? I always advise waiting with an evergreen that is burnt like that. Just wait. If growth is going to come, if growth is going to sprout forth from it, if you've determined there's still life there, wait. That will happen during May. There's plenty of time during May to replace it, so wait and see what happens and go from there. So, Amy, I'd really like to hear back from you what you find out about that, and if there's still life in the ends of the twigs, and if we can make a comeback.
Did she say if she planted this last year or 2 years ago, or time frame?
This was last summer.
Last summer, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Last summer. So it's not very well established yet, which could account for some burning too.
If there were still some kind of the signs of life, if she scratched the bark and there was a green layer underneath and there was a little kind of like sap on the ends when you're talking about that, would it benefit from I don't want to say extra, but some extra fertilizer, or do some fertilizing around the tree, or is that something
I
just
love
to
that
give it a
question.
little extra food?
Yeah, I love that question.
To help it along?
Now, fertilizer is for healthy plants,
right,
to make them healthier, and even Miracle-Gro can't resurrect a dead plant from the dead. And so it's interesting, though. Sometimes we think that maybe fertilizer would bring something around. But your question is a good one, because if there is life there, if the ends of the twigs should start to pop forth, then some fertilizer would help encourage that growth. So I would wait to see what happens. If there's a little life starting to burst forth in May, then apply a good, well-balanced fertilizer, because evergreens do like fertilizer.
And hypothetically, if that's the case, and there is a little growth this year, if it still, takes maybe a step backwards, but there is a little growth this year, next winter, sometimes we see this on evergreens around here, people will wrap their evergreens in burlap. And is that mostly to shade them from the sun and from dieback like that, or is that to shield them from winds? Would that be something that she could do next year if there is a little bit of life coming back to it?
Definitely, and you hit it, John. The reason people wrap evergreens, whether it's pines or arborvitae, is to do two things: protect them from the wind, and also to protect them from the sun. It shades them, shades them so that they don't get the winter burn. A few years ago, I watched Martha Stewart doing her thing, and she was shielding her evergreens with burlap. The method she was using, which is a recommended method, instead of wrapping them with burlap so that the burlap touches the needles, instead you drive some posts in and then close to the tree or shrub, and then wrap the burlap around those posts.
So like a perimeter.
Yeah, exactly. So that you're shading it, you're protecting it from the wind, but yet you're not weighting those branches down with burlap kind of twisted around them.
I suppose especially if it snows, you get a heavy snow, then that's extra weight.
Yeah, exactly.
Directly on those.
Yeah, whereas keeping it, the burlap on a frame was good. So I enjoyed kind of watching how Martha did it, and Martha was doing it the recommended way.
Well, yeah, we'd love to hear back from you. Let us know how your tree comes along. And maybe in the fall, we'll get some nice new pictures. Or if not, maybe you'll find something else to put in there.
Yeah, I'd be curious, and decisions have to be made. Do I work with that even if there's life, or do I just replace?
All right, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, let's talk about some spring cleanup, things we should be doing in the yard.
Local news affects your life. It gives you the confidence and clarity to make better decisions every day. You can support that with a digital subscription. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to take advantage of our introductory offer, just $6 for 6 months.
Okay, we're back, and this week we're talking about things to go out and do in the yard. The yard. Let's talk about the yard. We were talking about the Siberian squirrel that I've got coming up in my lawn. What are the things that we should be doing? I've seen a couple people mow already, and I know people are always.
Yeah, have you done your first mowing in?
No, and I got to say we are dog people, so I'm gonna have to rake up some patches that have been. Well used and over the winter. Where are you at with your yard?
Our grass is starting to think about needing some mowing.
It's getting great.
And it doesn't pay to jump the gun. There's no reason to. Although the first mowing, you can give it a little shorter. Maybe there's dried leaves and things you want to kind of mulch up and, mulch back down in. So, you can set the first mowing maybe 2 inches, 2.5 inches. But after about the first mowing, we should raise that mowing height to 3 to 3.5 inches. So we should get fairly rapidly to the preferred height. There's a good reason for that. When you let the grass get to about that height, 3.5 inches, and keep it at that height, there's more green there, more green blades, and more green means more chlorophyll, more photosynthesis going on. That'll produce a good deep root system. So at the beginning of spring here, we don't want to keep that lawn real short. We don't want to keep mowing off its photosynthesis mechanism because we want the grass to be really, really healthy. So I'm probably close to giving it a mowing, and then after that first mowing, then I'm going to set my mower to that 3.5 inch height on that. And also, raking. I've got a couple of areas that are kind of matted down. It's probably time about now to kind of fluff those areas up a little bit. Fertilizing, I have seen some people out fertilizing, but really the preferred time for fertilizing in the spring is more towards Memorial Day, when that grass is green and actively growing. Then it can use that up right away. And so now on our lawns, there's no need to really rush into the mowing and things on that. So, but boy, I can't wait to smell the aroma of that first freshly cut grass. Yep. So I am looking forward to that. As long as we're talking about the yard, trees and shrubs, there's a window of opportunity yet here to do any pruning on those, preferably before the leaves start expanding too much. So fairly rapidly, because if we hit some consistent warm weather, both the soil and the air temperature, things are going to pop pretty quickly. So we should get our pruning done. I've gotten a lot of calls recently on pruning paints, okay, because so people are busy pruning, and should they put a pruning paint or sealer on them? And the answer is generally no. The reason for that is it can prevent the natural healing or sealing of that wound. Trees have a tremendous capability to seal off and compartmentalize the pruning wounds. But if we're putting a bunch of black goo on it, it tends to interfere with that. As long as we're mentioning pruning, two types of trees that should not be pruned this time of year are birch and maple, because the sap is really flowing in those. And if we do prune, it won't kill the tree, but you'll have a bunch of maple syrup running all down the trunk. It makes a gooey mess on there.
Well, that could attract insects too.
Exactly. And then there's kind of a black mold that starts growing on top of that. So those, birch and maple, should be delayed with pruning until after the leaves have fully expanded. As long as we're talking about trees and shrubs, there is something that needs to be done fairly quickly if you are one of the many people who have had lilac diseases. That's been an epidemic the last 2-3 years around North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, and it has caused early defoliation of lilacs. And after a number of years, even good old hardy old-fashioned lilacs can really be stressed by this disease. And we're not thinking about leaf diseases right now because, well, it's early.
Yep.
But the preventative fungicide has to be applied when the lilac leaves are only a 1/2 inch expanded. So we have to, if we've been troubled with that lilac leaf disease, we have to get on that fairly relatively soon. So the garden centers have products, general purpose fungicides. The active ingredient is a mouthful called chlorothalonil. That's a really good one. But that needs to be sprayed on to the leaves when they're only about a 1/2 inch. So that's going to be coming up here in May fairly shortly. Otherwise, on shrubs and trees, we can do some pruning, a little bit of shaping. I need to do our roses. Trees should really have the tree guards removed also this time of year, so that the trunk gets exposed to the sunlight and the air and becomes nice and strong. It might not kill a tree if the tree wrap is on, except if that tree wrap or that tree tube is solidly in contact with the tree trunk. It can actually become embedded in that tree trunk as the tree trunk tries to grow out. So it's best, I think, to remove that tree guard. Tree guard being kind of an operative word there. Tree guards are not the best protection against mowers and string trimmers. It's better to mulch around the tree, a 3 to 5 foot diameter, and then you don't have to trim with a string trimmer or a mower that close. So that can all be done now too. Also, if your tree was staked, kind of with sturdy stakes over the last growing season, those should be removed now. it's best not to stake a tree for longer than about one growing season, maybe two, but the staking is meant to keep it kind of upright and sturdy until it roots out. And if we stake a tree for too long, it doesn't develop the natural movement that it should. And so this would be a good time now to remove tree stakes if we still have them in place from last growing season. And then next, vegetable gardens.
Yeah.
Have you got yours kind of ready to go? I mean, some things could be planted, but I mean, it's still early. Have you got yours ready?
I've got to clean them up. We kind of some of the low lying beds. It's where we stored some of our pots. So I've got to move some stuff around. So we're not quite there, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
I removed most of the old stuff off the vegetable garden, raked up all the old squash vines and all that last fall. And but I had some late cabbage and that I cut. And I didn't get the old plant kind of out of there. So I've got some old kind of remnants of cabbage plants still out in the garden. So I need to get those taken off. So I don't quite have ours ready yet. I would like to, when the weather moderates a little bit, plant some early peas and lettuce. They like chilly soil. So I'd like to get some of that going. Maybe an early crop of spinach also.
Okay, yeah.
And onions, they can go in when the soil's still chilly because they like cool soil. So there are some things. Sweet peas along our garden fence. We plant sweet peas each year that vine up on the garden fence. And sweet peas love cool soil. They prefer cool soil. So sweet peas could be planted now. I'm glad we're having this discussion because it kind of brings some of these things to my mind for my to-do list. So really, over the course of the next week, I should get our sweet pea seed planted. They're very hard seeds, so I like to soak them overnight and then plant them. That was a tip I got from my mom. We always had sweet peas along. And so now I'm going to kind of allocate part of my garden, as we discussed, to a no-till.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of work on that. Those that transition an in-ground garden to no-till indicates on heavy clay that it takes a few seasons, a few years to get to that point. A raised bed garden, of course, you've kind of modified that soil well, so it's kind of ready to go really for no-till. And I always like to add some organic matter to the soil. So, and have your raised beds, have they sunk a little bit? Do you need to do some,
a little bit.
Adding?
Yeah, I should probably fluff them up and then add a little on top there just to kind of give them make sure that they've got a I was going to say a good foundation, but that's not right. But yeah, give them a good top off.
I'm smiling when you said fluff them up a bit. I mentioned our keynoter, Charlie Nardozzi from Vermont. One of the questions was, can you reuse the soil in planters? And so I was listening to hear, because we reuse our soil. And I was listening to hear him say what his reaction was. And he said, yes, you definitely can. He said, one of the keys is in spring, fluff up the soil.
Okay.
And so I laughed and said, yes, I think that's a botanical term, fluff up that soil.
I'm using proper verbiage.
Yes, you are. So anyway, yes, fluff up the soil, whether it's in a raised bed or in the containers where you've reused. We can fluff that up and it'll be good to go.
All right. Well, let's take another quick break. When we come back, let's talk about what to do in the perennial garden, how to clean that up.
Local news holds our local leaders accountable, updates you on our local economy, and tells the stories of people like you. If that's important to you, consider a digital subscription. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to take advantage of our introductory offer, just $6 for 6 months.
All right, we're back, and this week we're talking about cleaning up the yard and garden, getting ready to go. We're just about there. You can feel it in the air. The ground's warming up. All signs are go, but we're not quite there yet because we got to do a little bit cleaning. Let's talk about the perennial garden. What should we be doing in there right now?
And it's fascinating for me to watch as perennials emerge from the ground, because they come up at different times. Some start really, really early, like we mentioned, like the fernleaf peonies and daylilies and things. Others take their time. But it is important to get that old stuff off at the proper time. Otherwise, it can carry diseases. And in the case of ornamental grasses, that old big top, that kind of haystack, if that's left intact, the new shoots that are coming from the ground have a hard time pushing through that haystack. So it's quite important to cut it down. I like to go down to about 1 inch. And a problem is if that grass starts coming up through that haystack, the new grass, then when you go and cut it off, you're cutting off the new grass shoots too. And so it's important to be observant and get that old haystack cut off before much starts growing. And as I was looking the other day, we had a few little sprouts starting to come up. And so I went ahead and cut off the old haystack of old grass. And I see a lot of commercial landscapes where sometimes that doesn't get done. On the prairie, prairie fire would take care of all that. Or grazing would get rid of that. But we need to, if you don't have a bison in your backyard chewing it down, you need to do it yourself. And so that's an important step to do. And it's interesting. Some perennials are really, really slow to emerge. One of the slowest is the winter hardy hibiscus, like the summerific type. Have you got one of those?
We had a hibiscus one year and it didn't overwinter. So
because
I don't think we had
borderline.
I don't think we had it in a great spot.
Last year was the first. 2 years ago was the first that I planted the summerific series, and it did winter fine. And so knock on wood for this year again, but they are really, really slow to emerge, so cutting back the old top gives me a little bit of leeway. So when I'm out in the perennial garden, I start cutting back those that I know are going to emerge quickest. I start removing the old top. And those that I know aren't going to be coming up very quickly, that gives me a little bit of time yet on those. And now we've talked in the past about our native pollinating bees can be hibernating in hollow stems. So when we cut off those, I've heard gardeners kind of in the predicament. Okay, we know we need to clean up our perennial garden, but are those little bees in there? We don't want to disturb those, but yet you need to cut back your perennials. So an entomologist gave me a really good method. He said, okay, cut back your perennials when they need to be cut back, such as my ornamental grasses, but some of them have really neat hollow stems. So cut them back when you need to, but don't go dump that in a compost site somewhere. Stack it behind the garage. Most of us have a spot somewhere in the yard off to the side where you can just kind of stack the material, especially the things that have hollow stems. Leaves not so much, but things that those could be nesting in. Just stack them in a pile somewhere. And by the end of May, those insects will have emerged when the weather's consistent. And then you can go ahead and do whatever you want with those hollow stems. I thought that was kind of a good compromise on that. Now, one thing a term that I've heard over the last couple of years in cleaning up a perennial garden is the chop and drop method.
I'm unfamiliar with this.
Yeah, I just ran across that maybe a year or so ago. And that is, okay, when you're cutting back perennials, instead of sticking it in the wheelbarrow and hauling it off somewhere else, what you do is, as the name suggests, chop and drop. There are certain perennials, the old dead tops on those, that you can almost kind of crumble up in your hands. Not something that has disease, such as peony leaves, better just to get those off of the place. But for other things, for example, on the perennial phlox.
Okay.
When you cut those off, you can almost just crumble them up by hand. Also, the sedum, the upright sedum, those stems, you can kind of just break and crumble those up or use a pruning shears to chop them up. And then those could be just left in place. Now, I use shredded bark mulch on all our perennial areas. And I've found that most of those stems, when you kind of crumble them up, chop them up, they mesh well and blend in well with the other mulch that you've got. And so instead of hauling stuff away, any chance I can now, I'll just crumble the stuff up. Now, hollow stems, if they have insects in, if you kind of suspect hollow stems, then maybe go stack them up somewhere, like I mentioned. But anything else that you have a chance to crumble up, it means one less wheelbarrow trip I have to make to the back corner where I compost some of the material too. So chop and drop, a University of Minnesota site is where I learned that. Are you familiar with the giant fleece flower?
Oh, yeah.
The great big, it looks like a shrub. It can grow 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide. And they, at the end of the season and over winter, they leave a big stalk that looks almost like sugarcane stalks. And they're huge, they're woody, but they chop up almost like wood mulch. And so instead of hauling those off, I've learned to I can't break them up by hand because they're pretty stout. But just with the pruning shears, I've just been chopping them up into pieces and leave them lay.
Okay.
So the chop and drop principle is a legitimate thing. Sometimes I used to do that, but I was concerned that I was being lazy. And I thought, well, no, now we have a term for it.
Right.
Chop and drop.
That's good. And again, it comes from reputable sources.
Yeah, exactly. And we can dig and divide, as things start to as you start seeing some new growth around perennials, good time to dig and divide, move things if you want to. I always like to wait until I see a little bit of growth coming. And then I know that I've got a live clump, that I'm not digging and dividing something that didn't make it through the winter. So lots of good things we can do. Rabbit control around some things that just the rabbits can't resist. Lilies.
Yep.
Lilies depend on the shoots coming up and continuing to grow. Like you can't cut back a lily and get it to flourish. So if the rabbits cut back that lily by eating it, then that kind of goes for the summer. It's not going to kind of regenerate things. Other perennials you could maybe kind of get by with the rabbit grazing and it'll still send up stalks. But certain things, I think I'm probably going to have to put wire cages around the lilies as they're emerging, or some pretty good repellent around them. Otherwise, I want to enjoy the lilies. All of these things, it makes you so. And we're anticipating all these things happening. So I don't mind having to protect those lilies because it's been a long winter. I want to see my lilies growing. Yeah. So anything else around the perennial garden, John, that you know of that you're going to be doing?
Oh, one thing that you brought up was fungicides on to prevent disease prevention.
Yes, such as on peonies. The powdery mildew, the grayish coating that oftentimes gets and makes peonies look not so hot, that actually should be, the fungicide should be applied fairly early when those stalks are emerging from the soil.
So before they leaf out.
As the stalks are coming up and out and really before they're fully leafed out. That kind of makes sense because those shoots are coming up through the soil, emerging through the soil, and that soil is where a lot of that disease organism probably is. So as they're coming up through the soil, those organisms are clinging on to those shoots, and so we need to get some preventative fungicide on. So a good all-purpose flower vegetable fungicide applied to disease-prone ornamentals is a good idea fairly early. Might have to reapply again, but just we'll follow the label directions.
Well, a lot of good information here and a lot of things that we should be doing here in the next couple of weeks before it really firmly is gardening season where we're really spending a lot of time doing planting and other things.
It's a fascinating time of year for me because, sometimes we focus on our to-do list. What do I need to get done? What do you need to prepare? But I enjoy sometimes just sitting and watching it happen. Just think of the change that it makes from winter snow to all of a sudden things are just popping and bursting forth. I think it's just a fascinating time to just kind of marvel in this whole work and what happens relatively quickly.
All right. Well, Don, all good stuff. If people have questions for you, whether about something that didn't winter well or things that they're looking forward to or things that they have questions about growing this summer, what's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, Kinzler, at ndsu.edu.
All right. Well, Don, thanks again. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone, for listening.